announcements. Here are all the copies for the case.
Shabbat Shalom, Hag Sameach. The folks will make their way to the sanctuary so we can have enough for a minyan. That would be much appreciated. I know we have more than a minyan here tonight. I also know that people sometimes choose cheesecake over minyan.
Nope.
No, we're just going
Lev
to do Lev
Shalem.
Shalem. Yeah, just like a 20-minute service. And we don't need to do Kiddush because I already did it. So.
Oh, that works. So
cut
yeah,
that
we'll
out.
just get these little additions here for Shabbat, but it's not much.
Okay.
It's essentially the same, but the Vayechu is added, which was not there, and Vishama is added, which was
Okay.
not there yesterday. So
Let me grab a sitter, and then we can just, as soon as the 10th person shows up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 still. We have a few more people in here, we can begin. 8, 9.
let's get the sun. I'm going to move that because I don't need it so much.
All right, we are going to do a very brief service to enable those who wish to say Kaddish to have that opportunity. We are on 39A. You're invited to rise for the Baruch Hu.
Baruchu et Adonai
Baruch
HaMevorach.
Adonai Hamvorach Le'olam
Baruch
Va'ed.
Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed.
You may be seated, page still 39A.
39. Still on, yeah. Marif.
Go ahead.
ומביא יום ומביא לילה ומבדיל יום ומבדיל בין יום ובין לילה אדוני צבאות שמו אל חי וקיים תמידים לך עלינו לעולם ועד ברוך אתה אדוני המעריב הרבים.
Amen. Page 40.
אהבת עולם בית ישראל עמך אתה תורה ומצוות וקיימו משפטים אותנו לימדת על כן אדוני אלוהינו בשוכבנו ובקומנו נשיח בחוקיך ונשמח בדברי תורתך ובמצוותיך לעולם ועד. כי הם חיינו ואורך ימינו והם נגה יומם ולילה ועבדך תסיר ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני אוהב עמו ישראל. שמע ישראל אדוני אלוהינו אדוני אחד. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך. והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך וקשרתם לאות על ידיך והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך וכתבתם המזוזות ביתך ובשעריך.
me silently 42.
אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם, אמת.
43.
את רודפיהם וצונאיהם בתומותי בה, ורוב עניו גבורתו, שבחו והודו לי שמו.
44.
ומלכותו ברצון קיבלו עליהם, משה ומיam ובני ישראל, לכהנו שירה, בשמחה רבה יאמרו כולם, מי כמוך ואלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש, נורא תהילות עושה פלא. מלכותך ובניך וכי הים לפני משה, זה אלי ענו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. ונאמר כי פדה אדוני את יעקב וגאלה מער חזק ממנו, ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל.
Page 45.
השכיבנו שלום ועמידון מלכינו לחיים. ושמור צאתנו ובואנו לחיים ולשלום, והטף יד עולם, ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך. ברוך אתה אדוני, הפורס סוכת שלום עלינו, הפורס סוכת שלום עלינו, ועל כל עמו ישראל ועל ירושלים.
Shomers on page 46.
ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת, לדורותם ברית עולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל, ביני ובין בני ישראל, אותי לעולם, אותי לעולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת, לדורותם ברית עולם. כי ששת ימים, כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת, לדורותם ברית עולם. וביום השביעי שבת וינפש, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת, לדורותם ברית עולם. וידבר משה את מועדי אדוני אל בני ישראל. יתקדש ויתקדש שמי רבה, ילמד יברך חירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביום ובחיי דכל בית ישראל. בגלה, בגלה, ובזמן הקריב, וימרו. אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך, לעלם ולעולמי עמיה. יתברך וישתבח, ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר, יתעלה ויתהלל, שמי דקודשה. לעילה מנגו ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דמירן ביעלמה, וימרו. Amen.
We're going to turn to page 306 and pray through page 314 for the silent Amidah. Please make sure on page 310 to include the Shavuot editions. Silent Amidah.
Also include the Shabbat editions, if you will, too, in red.
We'll turn to page 53.
ויכלו השמיים והארץ
Please rise.
ויכל אלוהים ביום השביעי מלאכתו אשר עשה וישפוט ביום השביעי מכל מלאכתו אשר עשה ויברך אלוהים את יום השביעי ויקדש אותו כי בו שבת מכל מלאכתו כי בו שבת מכל מלאכתו אשר ברא אלוהים אשר ברא אלוהים לעשות. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו ואמותינו אלוהי אברהם אלוהי יצחק אלוהי יעקב אלוהי שרה אלוהי רבקה אלוהי רחל אלוהי לאה האל הגדול הגיבור והנורא אל עליון קונה שמיים וארץ מגן אבות בדברו מחיה מתים במאמרו האל הקדוש שאין כמוהו המניח לעמו ביום שבת קודשו כי בם רצה להניח להם כי בם רצה להניח להם לפניו נעבוד ביראה ופחד ונודה לשמו בכל יום תמיד מעון הברכות אל ההודות אדון השלום מקדש השבת וברך שביעי ומניח בקדושה לעמדו שני יוני זכר למעשה בראשית. אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו ואמותינו וצאי במנוחתנו קדשנו במצוותיך ותן חלקנו בתורתך שבענו בטובך ושמחנו בישועתך קדשנו במצוותיך ותן חלקנו בתורתך שבענו בטובך ושמחנו בישועתך ותהה ליבנו לעובדך באמת ותהה ליבנו לעובדך באמת והנחילנו אדוני אלוהינו באהבה וברצון שבת קודשך וינוחו בישראל מקדשי שמך ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת.
אמן.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה ועלמא דברך ירדה וימליך מלכותי בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואימרו אמן יהי שמי רבה בברך לעלם ולעולמי עלמיה יתברך וישתבח ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתעלה Al Shmei de Kudisha, Shmei de Kudisha. Richu Leila Minka Bechada, Shirata, Tushbechata, Nechemata la Miran vi Alma, Tushbechata, Vinechemata, da Miran vi Alma, Imeru, Imeru, Amen, Titkabar, Tzilata, Uvaudon, Decha Yisrael, Kodam Avuhot, Divishmaya, 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 Veimeru, Veimeru, Amen, Yehishlamma, Rabba, Vijemaya, V'chaim Aleinu, V'chaim Aleinu, V'hakol Yisrael, Veimeru, Veimeru,
Amen.
Osti Shalom Imrama, Yase Shalom, Aleinu, Aleinu, V'al Kol Yisrael, V'al Kol Yoshvei Tevel, Veimeru, Amen.
We already did Kiddush, so we will jump to page 56
and remain standing for Aleinu. So please join us.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגור עלינו ככל המנה, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים עומדים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא שנותן שמיים ויוסד הארץ ומשל בשמיים. על כן נקבל לך אדוני אלוהינו לרבניהם בפרק וזרח להעביר לי מן הארץ והאלה ממקורות יקרתון לתקן עולם במלכות שדי. כי המלכות שלך היא ולא מעט ימלוך בכבוד כך כתוב בתורתך אדוני ימלוך לעולם עד ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו
You may be seated. This time we think of those whom death has recently taken from us, and those who have died in this season, years past, and those who we draw into our hearts as we remember them. If you hear the name of a loved one, you're invited to rise upon hearing their name. In the period of Shloshim, 30-day period of mourning, we remember Pat DeLay, mother of Dove DeLay, and Alice Garay, mother of Guy Garay. And this week we commemorate the following Yortzite's anniversary passing of these loved ones. Cantor Sarah Lippitt Allison, Americaus Birdwell, Robert Abby Beaton, Sidney L. Blattner, Thelma Crass, Harry Elster, Walter Fogel, Howard Garland, Lillian Elsa Gebhardt, Fred Hertz, Herman Kislansky, Rima Kogan, Evelyn Leslie, Norma Delamos Loeb, Solomon Lubner, Nancy Monroe, Frederick C. Nelson, Mark Orwashel, Joel L. Oliner, Anna Maston Palmer, Hans Pick, Robert Poff, Bernice Yabek Schiffman, Jacob Shilkrat, Harry Silverstein, Gerald Skolnick, Harry Spiegel, Dr. Fred D. Stone, Gloria Wolf, Irving Zealot, Israel Zlotnick, and Leon Zuckert. And if you have a name to add, I'll invite you to rise and share with our community.
Benjamin Cole.
Gary? And if you're watching on our live stream, thank you for joining us. I invite you to share a name as well. Zichronam livracha, may their memories be for a blessing. If you are in mourning or it's your tradition to do so, I'll invite you to rise. We are on page 58. Say these words: Yitkadah v'yikadash shemei Rabbah ve'alma divrach hirute v'yamlich malchuteh v'chayechon uvyomechon uvchaye dehol beit Yisrael ha'agala uvizman kari v'imru amen. Yehi shmei Rabbah mivrach le'olam olmei olmaya Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yipa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei d'kudusha prihu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nehemata da'ami ram be'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama Rabbah min shemaya v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. O say shalom b'imromav, Huya say shalom, Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. Sirs, peace and peace to all who are mourning. Comfort those who are bereaved. Before we do our closing song, with apologies to the board members who I see here, Jason, Virginia, Faye, thank you for your leadership, and also our staff. I know Galit is here, and Danny. And thank you to Mimi for a wonderful meal this evening in the Salt Lake City Police Department here. I will quickly go through this just to save time so we can hear more from our speaker, and so we don't have to cut him short. So thank you, Cantor, for leading us this evening as well. And tomorrow at 9:30, if you'd please join us for Shavuot and Shabbat services, day 2 tomorrow, in Yizkor as our 10th grade confirmation, and tomorrow is our 10th grade confirmation service. So our 10th graders will be leading us, and they've worked very hard putting this service together. I hope you come join and support them on what's a really special, meaningful occasion. And following the service, there will be a kiddush luncheon in honor of the confirmants sponsored by the congregation. Join us as well on May 31st at 5:30 p.m. along with Tree Utah at Shari Tzedek Cemetery, one of our cemeteries, for tree planting. We need volunteers of all ages needed to help plant 6 to 8 large trees along the north and east borders of the cemetery. More details can be found in your emails, including don't just show up. You have to register and fill out their waiver and authorization, so that's all in your email. And we have a lot going on for Pride Month as well. I will be representing our congregation at a Pride Interfaith service on May 31st at First Baptist Church in the evening. And then on Friday, June 2nd, Saturday, June 3rd, please join us for a special Pride Shabbat service using our Sidor Shar Zahav. And on Sunday, June 4th, please come join me at the Pride Parade in marching with the Kolami banner. And on Wednesday, June 14th, join us for a discussion on pride and pronouns, transgender Jewish identity in Utah. And you can find more information about that on our website. Also, our Intro Judaism classes are starting up again on Thursday. You can come talk to me Thursday evening. Come talk to me if you're interested in joining that cohort. It's for Jews and non-Jews alike, a great class. And then our next high holiday choir rehearsal will be on June 4th at 3 p.m. If you'd like to sing in the choir, please contact the cantor. And we have about 28 people going to Israel with me this summer. I'd love to hit 30, so if you still are wondering what to do this summer and you want to come to Israel, come talk to me. We'd love to have you on the trip. With that, we are going to close out our service with Al Shlosha Devarim, which you can find, I believe, on page 365. No, that's a different thing on
That's the thing,
365.
different book.
Never mind. Well, Al Shlosha Devarim, maybe you know it. Three things the world stands on: study of Torah, acts of loving kindness, and worship of God. Themes of this great holiday, which happens to be my favorite Jewish holiday. Cantor.
Please join me. Ashlosha devarim, ashlosha devarim, ashlosha, shlosha devarim, haolam, haolam, amen. Ashlosha devarim, ashlosha devarim, ashlosha, shlosha devarim, haolam, haolam, amen. Al haTorah v'al ha'avodah v'al gemilut chasadim. Al haTorah v'al ha'avodah v'al gemilut chasadim.
Thank you, Cantor.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Now, in lieu of a longer service and in lieu of me giving a sermon this evening, we have a special presentation. Oh, okay. And so with that, this has been a really special week. Not only is it Shavuot, and we had a great Tikkun Leil Shavuot program last night, I thought, and a great panel, interfaith panel, and we have our confirmation service tomorrow. But Shavuot is a holiday that's really a lot of focus on learning. After all, it's where we receive the Torah. And a lot of congregations bring scholars in, and I think that we have to be among the top congregations in the country this week in terms of who we were able to bring in for this holiday. Now, before I introduce him, I will give a big thank you to our administrative staff for all of their work in putting this together, as well as a big thank you to Galit Livne, our program coordinator, and also a tremendous thank you to Faye Lincoln, who really has been, as our adult education chair and our contact to our speaker, been working for months on this. The other day we heard about IBM and the Holocaust, which was equally, I would say, horrifying, disturbing as it was fascinating, and people just told me that was incredible. And then I had the privilege of hearing our speaker the other night at a private dinner talk about his perspectives on U.S.-Israel relations, the situation in Israel, judicial reform in Israel, the situation with Gaza, Iran, and the Abraham Accords, and very interesting perspectives at that. But I'm really looking forward to what we're going to talk about tonight. When I lived in Jerusalem, a community I got very close to was the Iraqi Jewish community, whose history goes back over 2,500 years. And 100 years ago, there were over 100,000 Jews in Iraq. Today, it's like 10 or something. And like literally, I'm not making that up. And what I think has been one of the biggest lies, if I can just be blunt and controversial, is in history, is that we hear people regularly, I think, criticize Israel and hearing about the plight of the Palestinian people being dispersed, the Palestinian diaspora and displacement as a result of the establishment of the State of Israel, they claim. And yet none of these folks, who often are detractors, I'd say, of Israel, mention the 750,000 Jews from the Arab world who were displaced at that time and thrown out of their homes or pressured out because of the fact that they were Jewish. And I think that is one of the most dishonest, disingenuous things I've ever seen personally in history anywhere in the world, and people are bringing up the history of this conflict to ignore that. And so Edwin Black, who's going to be our speaker this evening, is going to be talking about his efforts in bringing recognition to that horrible situation
with talking about International Farhood Day and a particular attack that happened on the Iraqi Jewish community. And so let me introduce him for those who were not here the other day, so you have an idea of who we'll be hearing from this evening. So Edwin Black is an award-winning, New York Times best-selling international investigative author. And he, of 200 award-winning editions in 20 languages in 190 countries, as well as scores of newspaper and magazine articles in the leading publications of the United States, Europe, and Israel. Since 2020, he has hosted the weekly issues-oriented and history-based The Edwin Black Show, which I believe Faye has been a guest on, and found at www.theedwinblackshow.com with its companion YouTube channel, which hosts edited and visually documented episodes plus trailers and bonus features. With more than 2.2 million books in print for a half century, his work is focused on human rights, genocide, organized hate, corporate criminality and corruption, governmental misconduct, academic fraud, philanthropic abuse, oil addiction, alternative energy, and historical investigation. Editors have submitted Black's work 14 times for Pulitzer Prize nomination, and in recent years, he has been the recipient of a series of top editorial awards and nominations. He also has contributed to a number of noted anthologies worldwide. For his human rights investigations, Black has been interviewed on hundreds of network broadcasts from Oprah, The Today Show, CNN Wolf Blitzer Reports, and NBC Dateline in the United States, to the leading networks of Europe, Latin America, and Israel. His human rights works have been the subject of numerous documentaries here and abroad. Many of his books have been optioned by Hollywood for film, with 2 in active production. Black's speaking tours include hundreds of events in dozens of cities each year, appearing at prestigious venues from the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., and Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts, to the United Nations in New York, to the Simon Wiesenthal Center in Los Angeles, and in Europe from London's British War Museum and Amsterdam's Institute for War Documentation to Munich's Karl Orff Hall. He has appeared to speak, lecture, or testify on a variety of social justice issues numerous times in various legislatures, such as the U.S. House of Representatives, the North Carolina General Assembly, the European Parliament, the Australian Parliament, the Canadian House of Commons, and Israel's Knesset. In February and early March 2014, Black appeared before 4 parliaments in 4 weeks, the British House of Commons in London, the European Parliament in Brussels, the Israeli Knesset in Jerusalem, and finally before the U.S. House of Representatives of Foreign Affairs Committee in Washington, D.C. And on behalf of, really I'd like to say to the whole congregation, I want to deeply apologize that I failed you as your rabbi and didn't get a more impressive speaker this evening for all of us. No, I'm just teasing them. That is quite the resume, Mr. Black, and I would like to acknowledge that your wife Carol is here as well, and you've been wonderful too in helping us set this up. You all work together, right? Are you his publicist officially, or what would you say? I'm not sure. You're the woman behind. Everybody needs a woman behind the curtains. That's been. You're actually sitting right in front of the blue curtain there, so you're kind of even blending in. But Carol Black as well as visiting us, and we're thrilled to have you here and appreciative of all your work. But without further ado, Edwin, if you could please once again bless us with your teaching and wisdom and your journalism. Thank you.
Shalom, everyone. Chag Sameach, Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for having me for this additional event. It's never pleasant when I speak, so settle in. I'd like to make a couple of preliminary remarks, and that is that I was very moved by the rabbi's remarks, but I also enjoyed tremendously the cantor's work. My daughter is a cantor, so she's doing what you're doing right now in Long Island. Or I guess she just finished. Yeah, she just be finished. the things that the rabbi said about the Palestinians and displacement and all of that are very apropos for today's discussion. They deserve, first of all, he's absolutely correct. And they deserve a much deeper discussion, and one day we will have that. So the rabbi was right on with that. Thank you, Rabbi. Today I'm only going to speak for 20 minutes, and this is usually a 2-hour lecture. So, Carol, just when I'm 5 minutes, let me know that I'll take any questions that you have. And no statements, just questions. And I'll try to give it to you as rapidly as possible. The Farhud was the Arab Nazi pogrom of June 1st, June 2nd, 1941, that committed murder, arson, rape, and a horrible, heinous pogrom in Baghdad, Iraq. Now, I should tell you something. We're going to be discussing ethnic violence here, because when you're discussing the Holocaust, there's a great deal of ethnic violence. But this, we have to be careful to keep this in the past and not to invoke any of our unhappiness against our current neighbors. So now you know what the Farhud was. It means, in Arabic dialect, kind of Kurdish, violent dispossession. And on that day, as I say, the Jews were murdered openly, wantonly. The stores were burned. The shows were burned. And hundreds were killed. And perhaps in our discussion, which will grant us more time, I'll give more details. Now, why did this occur? The Jews had been living in the Middle East and in Iraq for some 2,700 years in peace. That's 1,000 years before Muhammad. They were actually, after the expulsion from Spain, many of them came into the Ottoman Empire, and wherever they went, they were either persecuted or they were accepted and exalted. But whether or not they were persecuted depended upon the regime and the family and the country, or whether they were exalted, and in some cases they actually had regal standing. All was done with permission of the Arab community. So a lot of this goes back to about 600, some say 700, some say 620, the Pact of Umar. And as the Arabs swept out of the Arabian Peninsula, the definition of an Arab is a descendant of the Arabian Peninsula. Most of them were Bedouin. The word bada means sleeping outside. And if there's two guys sleeping outside, they were Badawin, which brings us Bedouin. And it was convert or die. And for the people of the book, it was become dhimmis. That's Dhimmi, which means a special type of second-class citizen. Not only they were allowed to practice their religion, but they couldn't expand their religion, and every year they had to give a special tax, a guilt tax, called the jizya, and it had to be submitted on bended knee, and they would, when they gave it, they got a clap on the side of the head to show their dominance. So they were discriminated against, but as I say, in many areas, in many parts of the Islamic world, the Islamic crescent, they were either persecuted or praised for their presence. Now, after World War I, the League of Nations invented numerous countries in the Middle East where no countries ever existed. That's about 7 countries. That's Lebanon, that's Syria, that's Iraq, eventually Jordan, modern Hijaz, modern Egypt, and one Jewish country. And that one Jewish country was called Israel. Okay, so that means that the Jews would have autonomy. They would have they would have self-governance, because nationalism, despite what you've heard on CNN, was the gold standard for human rights. At that time, it was called self-determination, and people could identify with whatever they wanted in terms of culture, in terms of religion, in terms of geographics, and they were allowed to rule themselves instead of being colonized out of Europe. Okay, so as a result of the Jews being given permission to govern themselves in Jewish Palestine, the Arabs went nuts. And the reason they went nuts is there was the original two-state solution where which was arranged between Chaim Weizmann and Faisal in Eilat in 1919 in the presence of Lawrence of Arabia, signed agreement. The Arabs were supposed to get Syria, and the Jews were supposed to get Palestine. The French kicked the Arabs out of leadership in Syria, took over, and so the two-state solution died, and the Jews were not welcome to establish their own homeland. A man arose at that time called Hajj Amin al-Husseini, also known as the Mufti of Jerusalem. And the Mufti of Jerusalem was the head cleric of Jerusalem, and he was on the British payroll, and his job was to keep peace at whatever cost, because the British only wanted one thing. They didn't want really self-determination for anyone. They really just wanted self-determination for the oil in the Middle East. They wanted to determine it would be under their control. So actually, it is an electoral position. He lost the election amongst the local Arabs in Jewish Palestine, and the British canceled the election and made him the Mufti instead. And to make him even muftier, they invented a new title called the Grand Mufti. So now he became the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, another invented position. So he was always agitating against the Jews, and the Jews were at that time mainly undefended. Many were religious. There were indeed many settlers. There was violence every day, and he had a habit of speaking peace and conciliation in English, and then in speaking in Arabic to his followers, it would always be kill the Jews, kill the Jews, kill the Jews. There was a lot of murders and bombings under the auspices of the Mufti of Jerusalem. The British decided they would arrest him. They called in their Muslim Indian guards to go into Al-Aqsa, and he escaped dressed as a woman, made his way up to Iraq, and set up a fascist coup called the Golden Square. Now, it's important to understand, we're talking about Iraq, we're talking about Baghdad, but it's completely organically connected to Jewish Palestine, which, remember, at that time, Jewish Palestine was from here to there, and then the Arabs didn't want the Jews to even have that, so then they invented in 1920 a brand new country that never existed called Jordan, which never existed. There were no ancient Jordanians, so if your tour guide to Petra says there were ancient Jordanians here, you know there never was. And that took up approximately 72% of the Jewish landmass, which now looks more like the way it did on that bifurcated map. So he went up to Iraq and formed an alliance with the Nazis and with fascists. So when I say these were Arab Nazis, I don't mean that these were Arabs with a bad attitude. I don't mean these were Arabs who said nasty things. I mean these are Arabs who idolized Adolf Hitler and who actually marched in the torchlight parades of Nuremberg. They had swastikas embedded in their national flags. They listened to Radio Berlin, and every night the Jews are getting ready to rape your women. the Jews have got to be destroyed. They want to take over Iraq. And they even had their own Lawrence of Arabia called the Arab Lawrence. His name was Groba, constantly agitating the protocols of the elders of Zion, was with the permission of the foreign ministry, translated into Arabic. It was serialized. So we got real Arab Nazis here. At the same time, what's going on? We're talking about May of 1941. The Nazis are getting ready to invade Russia, Operation Barbarossa, okay? And what do they need? They need one thing. They need oil. And where is the oil? The oil is in Iraq. And who owns that oil? It's the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, now known as British Petroleum or BP. Now, I've written a number of books on this. I wrote The Farhood. I wrote a book called British Petroleum and the Red Line Agreement. You can't buy them now. You can see them now. And after the Chag, you can get them, make some arrangement. Or you can go to my website, edwinblack.com, and get an autograph. Or you can pay less and call Jeff Bezos at Amazon. He desperately needs the money after that $2.5 million diamond he just gave someone. All right, so they make a deal with the Nazis to expel the British and take out the Iraqi oil and give it to the Nazis. That operation did not work. The British fought back and they expelled the effort. In fact, they actually contributed one of their best bombers to bomb the British fields. And when the Arabs saw him, they were so happy to see the guy because they knew he was a great Nazi pilot. They all shot their rifles in the air in celebration. They shot the guy down and killed him. Okay, so they lost that battle, which I won't go into detail now, and it's Shavuos, okay? And the new, and the British are bringing in the new royalty to come in just on Shavuos to take their position now that they think that they have defeated this coup. At the same time, the Jews are told by the radio, all the Jews pack food for a 2-day trip into the desert and turn your radios off and do not leave your homes. And they marked all the homes with special insignia for the Jews. And it was understood that the Jews would be sent into concentration camps and probably killed in the desert in the same way that there were Nazi concentration camps in North Africa. And of course, there was a huge nexus between the killing machines of Germany, North Africa, and the Middle East. Remember, there's a lot of French property in the Middle East under Vichy France, which was in alliance with the Nazis. So they need this oil, and they're expecting to get it. That fails. And then the next thing they want to do is blame the Jews. And so the Jews are told, get ready to go into the desert. Chief Rabbi Kaduri goes to the mayor of Baghdad at that time. He says, please don't do this. He goes to the floor and begs. And the square, the Golden Square, these fascist lieutenants are expelled, and the Mufti of Jerusalem escapes and goes through Italy to Nazi Germany and has the famous meeting with Adolf Hitler. It was not a secret meeting. It was broadcast. It was newsreeled. It was known all over the world, where they expanded and solidified the Arab-Nazi alliance. Now, the Arab-Nazi alliance was not a little alliance. It involved tens of thousands of active fighters, and it was organized through the Arab Higher Committee. It was transnational. It was transcontinental. and it was vibrant, okay? So you shouldn't think it was just one little group of renegades. This was a big thing. They used to say, in heaven, your master is Allah, and on earth, your master is Adolf Hitler. In fact, Hitler became the second greatest, most popular name for a newborn in the Arab world after Muhammad. In fact, General Tantawi, who preceded the current Egyptian general, his famous general brother's name is Hitler Tantawi. So there's a lot of Hitlers running around Egypt. Okay, so the effort to gain the oil and transfer it to the British is gone. And without that oil, the Allied movement would have come to a stop. And if the Nazis got that oil, they would have been able to further enhance and accelerate their invasion of Russia. The effort to pick up all the Jews and expel them didn't work, and now the royal family has come back. The Jews go to the bridge to meet them, and they are observed by a bunch of soldiers returning from dejected violence and a dejected military loss, and that's when the pogrom begins. All over Baghdad, the Jews were killed, parents in front of their kids, kids in front of their parents. I can't go into the details that I normally do because this setting is not appropriate, but you can see many episodes on the Edwin Black Show. Just think of the most heinous, most gory, and barbarous pogrom that you can imagine. And that was the beginning of the end for the Iraqi presence there. It was finally put down after 2 days. Many people burned and killed businesses. Every family knew about this from the Sephardic point of view, and many had the same story. They would barricade the doors with furniture. The marauders would push open the doors. They would chase them up the stairs. They would throw jewelry on the steps so they could stop and pick it up, chase them to the roof. They would run from rooftop to rooftop and then run out of rooftops, and sometimes throw their kids down to waiting blankets. Okay. So for the Sephardic community, this was their Kristallnacht. No one knew about it here. I discovered it. It was called the Forgotten Pogrom in my book, Banking on Baghdad. I just found it. It was unknown, so I wrote about it. Then I investigated the fuller story and the roots of the Arab Nazi Alliance going back centuries, and I wrote the Farhud, Roots of the Arab Nazi Alliance in the Holocaust. Now, it's an interesting story why it was never known. It was never known in the United States, and so many Sephardic families, they all came out. They said, someone is finally talking about our travai. And the answer is several reasons. One, we have a Eurocentric understanding of the Holocaust. Second, the Eurocentric, and trust me, my parents are from Poland, they're Holocaust survivors. There's no diminishment of the centrality of the pain. But the Sephardics also were targets of the Hitler regime. And all across North Africa and all across the Middle East, the Nazis made alliances, they made concentration camps, they tortured the Jews, they seized their property, and they too have their story. And because they have their story, it leads us to better understand just what was the Holocaust and Hitler's war against the Jews. And the answer is, it wasn't against European Jewry, it was world Jewry. Europe first. Okay, so I wrote this, and then we discovered another leading reason for the lack of understanding was the U.S. Holocaust Museum refused to recognize the bloodshed and the pogrom. And they wouldn't recognize any of the North Africans, any of the Tunisians, the Iraqis, the Syrians, any of those who were targeted by the Hitler regime, because this Hitlerian violence violated the mission statement of the Holocaust Museum. Now, what was the mission statement? To document the destruction of European Jewry. So if the destruction was a few miles that away, it was left out. And if they didn't bake it, they didn't want anyone else bringing bread. So it's not good to figure out, to reveal what they forgot to reveal. So I stood up against the Holocaust Museum, and there was a wide movement of other Jewish leaders. Malcolm Hoenlein, he was the head of the Conference of Presidents, major Ashkenazi and Sephardic leaders, and finally they did recognize it. And I stood up against them because if you're going to stand up against anyone, you may as well be a giant. So, eventually, in 2015, I and about 10 major Jewish leaders went to the United Nations, and I personally proclaimed International Farhud Day, International Farhud Day, which is now celebrated around the world. And then later, I proclaimed Yom HaGirush, which is the expulsion, the mass expulsion, which was covered by the New York Times on page 1 that the rabbi referred to. I'll come back another day and talk about that. All these topics are on my website, and we're out of time. I'm getting the high sign from my wife, so I'll take your questions. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. All right. Questions? Short, one sentence. The gentleman from St. George, what's your question? The Farhud is taught, first of all, we have many elaborate ceremonies with heads of state and candle lighting and recitations. I myself do a show, and on June 1st, which even though June 1st is the date, Shavuos is the Hebrew incident. I'll be speaking on it with the senior rabbi from Dubai, Rabbi Eli Abadi, who has been a leader in this effort. So it's taught in Canada, it's taught in England, it's now being taught in Israel, and so I uncovered it, and I just found out that the Wikipedia entry on this has completely removed my name. I just found out a few hours ago, but we'll have that fixed. So yes, who else has a question? Yes, please. D.C., the one in D.C., which is a chartered organization in the United States. Everything they have there is truthful, but there's a lot of stuff missing in the donut. So no IBM, no Ford, no General Motors, no American collusion, no mention that no concentration camps were liberated. They were freed accidentally because FDR didn't want to bomb the tracks to any of the concentration camps. So they have some red lines. And they also had a red line at that time, which was not to discuss Arab involvement in the Holocaust, which was manifest, multinational, and quite monstrous. Thank you for a good question. Who else has a question? Yes, Faye? That's a great question. I never get that question. What happened to the Grand Mufti after the Farhud? Well, he was kept as a client of Adolf Hitler. They celebrated the Farhud the way we are doing now, right in Berlin, but they celebrated not as a commemoration, but as an exuberation, as a celebration. He continued to agitate. His nephew was a guy called Yasser Arafat. He was supposed to be indicted by the United Nations for war crimes. He was very involved with the concentration camps. He went to the concentration camps. We have pictures of him with Himmler. He was in charge of 3 Arab divisions in Central Europe, the Skanderbeg, the Handschar, and the Kama division, tens of thousands. He recruited around the world. No one could touch him. He died an illustrious death. He wrote a biography in which he said Adolf Eichmann was a rare diamond to be cherished. And I believe now his hotel is the Waldorf Astoria in Jerusalem. Who else has a question? Rabbi.
You gave a fascinating presentation the other day about how IBM was involved in every single aspect of the Holocaust, according to your research. Where did IBM have a connection to Farhud or the plight of Arab Jews?
Well, that's kind of an interesting question. First of all, let me fine-tune your remark. I didn't say every aspect of the Holocaust, but the 6 phases of the Holocaust that we know. Now, IBM was very, very involved with Vichy France. And there was a heroic man, René Carmi, who was supposed to tabulate all of the Jews, and he left out the column for Jews, and instead made it possible to recruit the French resistance for Operation Torch, which brought the Allies down to North Africa, across and up through the boot. They were providing services, but quite indirectly, because when it comes to the Arab communities, especially Iraq, you don't need a punch card. You don't need a tabulator. The Jews were known. They knew what they looked like. They knew what their family names were. They knew what their houses were. They marked them. And the Jews of Iraq, which about 140,000, were deeply involved in the success of the country. They had helped formulate all its institutions when it was invented after World War I as a nation. They gave it governance, they gave it stability, they gave it mercantilism. And that was the beginning of the end. Now, there's a lot of false stories that some Israeli agents went around and blew up some bombs and stuff. And it's a big, deeper story to talk about the actual exodus of the Jews. But the Jews were kicked out penniless and stateless from Iraq and from all these other countries. And it all began with this sudden and resolute Arab Nazi ignition that Jews were no longer welcome in their homeland of more than 2.5 centuries. Another question? Yes, sir. What's your name? Hey, Matthew. No?
So now Morocco, which kicked out all its Jews, has normalized relations with Israel. Is that, you think, something that will spread and that could lead to more recognition, atonement on the part of some of these Arab governments that carry on?
Well, that's a great observation. Oh, yes. The question is, Morocco has now joined the Abraham Accords. Jews can come and go. Morocco, as the gentleman correctly said, expelled all or most of its Jews. And they were expelled penniless. They pulled the rings from their ears and the scarves from their necks and the bracelets from their ankles, and they expelled with nothing. And what's interesting, every family of Sephardic tradition knows this story. It was never introduced into the United States, which is why it was called the Forgotten Pogrom. So does it atone for that? It incorporates that. You know, I was having dinner here an hour ago, and we talked about historical equity. So everybody knows what Morocco did. Morocco knows what Morocco did. And Morocco knows about the vibrant involvement of the Jews in Moroccan history. In fact, the Moroccan ambassador told me about some beautiful artifacts that are kept in the king's personal chamber. So they're welcome to come back to Morocco. They're welcome to visit. They're welcome to have a cup of coffee, have a tagine, but they're not welcome to try to claim any of their prior property. All of that's been gone. So remember, all these Jews in all these countries, Algeria, Iraq, Syria, Egypt, they were expelled, and all their property was expropriated. And what's interesting is my show on June 1st will say, can it happen again? And we identify the 2 locations in the world where we think there's a possibility that it could happen again. You'll have to wait till next Thursday to find out. Yes, ma'am. Well, and I understand you're asking IBM questions, and I'll answer those. I went to the Holocaust Museum. My parents are survivors. My mom escaped from a train on the way to Treblinka. She was pushed out of the little vent. My father, she was shot by the AK, the Armia Krasnia in Poland, and buried in a mass grave. My father found her and pulled her out. He saw her leg. They lived together for 2 years, and their story was fabulous, and there are another million unbelievable stories, so there's a story everywhere. So some years ago, there was something called the Worldwide Gathering of Jews, of survivors, and they all came, they all went to the Holocaust Museum, and once we were there, we saw an IBM machine right in the first exhibit. No explanation for what it was doing. And people said, well, that doesn't compute, IBM and Holocaust. And it turns out that I declared that I would discover why it was there and what IBM's role was in the genocide. And as I said, never stand up to anything less than a real big bully. And so we found out that IBM had the punch cards, which all of you know about, the punch cards which calculated information, and those were sold consciously to the Nazis for each and every custom need on an aggressive monetary basis as a company activity under the micromanagement of the sociopathic war criminal Thomas J. Watson, who was the president, a convicted extortionist in the National Cash Register case. And I brought all of this out. It appeared in 40 countries, in 14 languages, at the same minute of the same hour of the same day all around the world, so IBM couldn't stop it. I remember coming out on the Today Show and on NBC, and IBM suddenly released a message that appeared on all these screens everywhere. You're going to hear something about us, and it's going to distress you. So that's what got me going. Naturally, that museum, that piece has been removed from the museum. You can now go where it was, and you could see 2 holes in the floor drilled. The museum said too many people were looking at this display, and it had to go. And it's gone, and as a coincidence, IBM has got a great website and some millions of dollars in donations from IBM. Hope that answers your question. Next person. Oh, by the way, they've never denied a comma in my book. Yeah, I said, Rabbi, don't worry. Their lawyers are not going to call you and say, how are you implicating us in genocide? Their lawyers are going to hide. And people say, oh, well, we don't know. Anyway, who else? Yes. International Farhood Day was established by the UN. As I said, I declared it. It is June 1st, June 2nd, let's say June 1st, recognized by the Israeli Foreign Ministry, but it also occurs on Shavuos, and because it is both has a calendar date and a Chag date of Shavuos, Faye and the rabbi and others thought it would be ideal for me to talk about what the Farhud was, and so that's why I'm addressing it now. They're all recognizing it. It's a Google calendar date now. It's recognized by the United Nations. It's taught by people. And a lot of times you hear people say, that's funny, a third of our generation doesn't even know what the Farhud was. And that was a question they wouldn't have even asked before 2010 when my book came out. Anyone else have a question? A question from Faye. Yes, Faye. Well, the question was from Faye. You talked about the protocols of the elders of Zion. You talked about in the Arab lands. In Iraq. You talked about the translation. And now the Arab. It's been translated into Arab, and it is one of the most popular books in Arab. So, pardon me. I don't know about that. But I will correct you. It's not one of the most popular books. It's the single most popular book in the Arab world. It's featured in all of the Arab book shows, trade shows. So when Hitler got elected, when Hitler was appointed on January 30th, 1933, because he was not elected, it was a power grab. I know that some of our politicians have talked about Hitler being elected. He was never elected. So it's fun to know the facts when you hear wrong stuff on TV. There was a disputed election, and he was appointed to be the chancellor. His policy was that the Jews would be boycotted. There would be an equity move to take all their property back, expel them, et cetera, et cetera. And the Arabs, especially in Jewish Palestine, said, wow, this is our guy. This is who we want to work out with. So they trekked down to the German consul, Consul Wolf in Jaffa, and they said, hey, we want to join the Nazi Party. And German Foreign Ministry said, you can't join the Nazi Party, you're Arabs. You're Semites. We're anti-Semitic. And they said, okay, if you won't let us join the German Nazi Party, we'll make our own Nazi parties. And Nazi parties sprang up all over the Middle East. And not only the Middle East, the Muslim world, going all the way to India before Pakistan was invented, and many other places. So, and you'll see it in their flags. For instance, the Syrian Socialist National Party has a moving swastika in it. They made up a folklore about Adolf Hitler. They said he really wasn't a German guy. In Linz, his real name was Muhammad Hadar, a little Arab boy who went to all the mosques in Egypt and prayed and then became a leader of Germany. So there's a lot of idolization and cultic worship of Hitler and the Nazis. So, eventually, the German Foreign Ministry said, we don't want these guys. We believe they're low on the eugenic totem pole, but we got to get the oil. And we got to counter Britain, because one of the dynamics of this period is that British has colonialism, and they've taken over the whole Middle East, especially for oil. And they've created all of these countries that never existed. with rulers so they could protect the oil pipelines. One was Anglo-Persian Oil Company, which became BP. A second one was they got 51 oil importers, no refinement together. They said, okay, we'll take the 51 oil importers. The total is 51. That's a good total. We'll call this company Total. That's where Total gets its name in France. So they got special permission from the foreign ministry to change the word anti-Semitic in the protocols of the Elders of Zion and Mein Kampf to anti-Jewish. And as a result of that, they were able to serialize Mein Kampf. They had the Fatwa, Arab Nazi youth running around with Nazi flags and Arab flags. And so it was from that point that the malevolent protocols of the Elders of Zion and Mein Kampf both spread throughout. Because remember, the Ottoman Empire, which had sway over the Arab Middle East for over 400 years, the Industrial Revolution bypassed them. So writing was invented there, but no printing presses. 70,000 scribes until the 20th century. And eventually it caught on, and because anti-Semitism is a cause célèbre in the Arab world, even as we recognize that the Abraham Accords helps us move forward into the future. Jews have eyes in the back of their head, so they always know what happened, and also peripheral vision, so they always can they used to have peripheral vision. Now I think they're tunnel vision for many in our Jewish community. And so that's why the Protocols of the Elders of Zion and Mein Kampf have both exploded in popularity, even at the German book fairs, the Frankfurt Book Fair and the London Book Fair and many other book fairs. Very good question. Yes? Well, they mean the same thing. Right, so in Iraq, just in Iraq, because the Arabs knew that they were Semites. Anyone know what a Semite means? Anyone in the room? Who said that? The cantor knows. Noah had 3 sons, and one of them was Shem, right? And the descendants of Shem were the Shemites, and that became anglicized with the SH to an S to the Semites. And of course, there's also the descendants of Ham, which we're not going to get into right now, but obviously the cantor knows. And so that's what they all considered themselves Semites. And they wanted the word anti-Semite gone, and the foreign ministry gave permission for all this to go down, and they helped subsidize this, publish it. They taught this in the schools, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, another question on this side? Question? On that side, Slicha? Yes, madam? 2 questions. Start with the one. Yes. Increasing. Okay, so your question is, can the current demographic imbalance in Israel? It's a good question, not pertinent to today, but I'll address it. So the answer is, don't worry. There's so many Jewish babies going on in Israel. You don't have to worry. There's no demographic bomb going off in Israel. The Arabs are about 20% of the country, and many of them are in their own places. There are many, many loyal Israeli Arabs. They're, like all groups, they suffer from societal admixture. You know, when the Sephardim that I spoke of, these 850,000 Jews, when they came to Israel, they were put in a minority. By the way, the Jews who came from Iraq and Tunisia and Libya, the ones that he referenced, they weren't put in refugee camps except for a few minutes. They were absorbed. Israel has a ministry of absorption to bring these people in. And these Sephardim, these people who considered themselves second-class Israelis until recently during my lifetime, are now running the country and deciding what laws will be passed, what powers will be done, etc. And it makes me ask, and you may ask this question too, why are there Arab and Palestinian refugee camps in Gaza and the Palestinian Authority decades later in an area where they control? Why don't they just pick their tuchuses up and walk across the street and grab a Starbucks? Who's keeping them in those camps? And no one will answer. What, even the UN standard, the outer limits of what a refugee can be is 7 to 11 years. In other words, there's no real reason why 850,000 people were simultaneously expelled penniless into Israel and put into temporary camps and then absorbed into the country into positions of power and admixture. And 75 years later, there's still refugee camps in Ramallah, in Gaza, in Jordan. Why are they there? So you asked a question, and I raised you one question. What's your second question? The life of Jews in Israel? 7 times. Yeah. Into Israel. Oy. Okay. Okay, so this is demographic Israel today. She wants to know why Reform and conservative Jews have historically not been welcomed into Israel. And that'll be the last of our demographic questions, because I know Galit is looking forward to my answer. So I go back in Israel to donkeys on Jaffa Road. I go back to my friend Moshe Dayan, to way, way back, when Israel was still mainly desert, and the desert was still trying to figure out how to bloom. And during that time, I can tell you that it was very hard for Reformie and conservative to get established in Israel. Why? Because it's a Jewish state. Even when they're not being Judaic, they still think it's a Jewish state and they have to live up to an idea. I was the guy who brought together the Reform rabbi and the Orthodox rabbi of Baku and got them to sign an accord where they could both live in peace. Now, this is not the case today. Today we have a different situation. We have a city called Tel Aviv and a city called Jerusalem. And in Tel Aviv, they got a lot of scooters, and in Jerusalem, they got a lot of synagogues. And so Israel is now catching the societal disintegration bug that we have in America. We've exported it, and they've got it. And so they're fighting with each other for who is the better Israeli, what does it mean to be a better Israeli, does it mean to live in a non-Judaic Jewish state, like America is a non-Christian Christian state, or should we have Jewish ideals? We still want to be pluralistic, and so it's a growing pain, and it's a growling pain, and these undercurrents have usually just been lived with and are now being verbalized more, and they committed the cardinal sin of asking everybody else in the world to get involved and take a side when that should not have been done. But I think that the Jews are going to get along just fine, and it bothers me, and I believe that reform is now well established. Conservative is well established. One day soon, two Jews who aren't Orthodox could probably get married in Israel. So they're making a great deal of progress. Who else has a question? Oh, yes, please. Of the Farhud, of the Arab Nazi Alliance. Well, the question is, was there a situation that encouraged the Nazi Alliance? And the answer is, of course, because it was the Arab Higher Committee. So it wasn't renegade Arabs, it was the leaders of all the Arab groups in the Supreme Arab Committee who got together in a kind of an Arab nationalism, if you will, and decided that the Jews would not be allowed to have their state, and the best way to achieve that was to follow Adolf Hitler. And so it was de rigueur. It was German, the German culture was taught. Persia changed its name in April of 1935 to Iran, specifically to appease the German economic minister. Iran means Aryan. And the Germans had this imaginary idea that they were Aryans. This a complete fictitious genealogical ancestry gobbledygook. And the Iranians, whereas the Persians actually did have Aryan ancestry. And so, yes, it was a national movement, but it was also a popular movement. It was not imposed from on top. It was enjoyed. Even, they actually had Hitler love letter contests in Cairo after the war. There, Al-Musia was a great Egyptian newspaper, and they had a contest for who could write the best love letter to Adolf Hitler. This is long after World War II. And one guy said, oh, the winner of one of the contests said, oh, Adolf Hitler, you were right. One day you'll come back, et cetera, et cetera. And the author of that Adolf Hitler-loving letter, contest winner, was Anwar Sadat. Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff bouncing around up there. Who else has a question? Yes, no. Another fine question. Did you find any righteous Gentiles saving Jews? Actually, they were righteous Muslims, because what happened is many Muslims stationed themselves outside the doors of Jewish homes to protect Jews. They did it as long as they could till they were overwhelmed. There was a vicious pogrom that's indescribable here that I did describe in my book in the 20s, in 1929, in Hebron, under the direction of the Mufti of Jerusalem, and that was mitigated by neighbors, Arab neighbors, guards, etc. Remember, not all the Arab families were opposed to the Jews, and even Husseini's family made a tidy profit selling land to the Jews. The problem was, for the British and for the Allies and for the Jew haters around the world, is how can we get How can we unsell the land sold to the Jews? How can we disinherit that when they bought it legally at exorbitant prices? Because any Arab who had some land said, okay, fine. And remember something. Whenever anybody says, I have Arab land, Palestinian land, who are you paying taxes to? Where's the tax money? Because until April of 1858, all Middle East land was owned by the Sultan. And it was only the Ottoman Land Registration Act of 1858 that finally allowed people to declare land as their own registered land. And for the first 2 years after the Ottoman Land Registration Act allowed every person to say, I'm working this land, I'd like to register it as my own, there are only 2 registrations in the whole Ottoman Empire, because as soon as you registered your land, you paid taxes and your son went to the army. So all of the registrations that I have seen have been faked, and there's no surveys. Just my land goes to the tree and a little bit to the creek. So very, very good question. All right. I'm being given the high sign. It's time. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much. Wow, what a way to cap off this amazing week of your teaching, and thank you all for being here. And you know, this is one of our really happy holidays, Shavuot. But as Jews, like one of the reasons that we step on a glass when we get married. Well, before my wedding, somebody told me it was so that the groom can have a chance to put his foot on. But the reason that we learn traditionally that we step on a glass is to remember even our moments of joy, some destruction in the world. So I greatly appreciate this presentation, Edwin, because on this holiday of joy, where like today I talked about this morning, the biggest commandment really that we learn from the book of Ruth is being kind to the stranger in our midst. It's important for us to remember the brokenness in our world, including the important stories of the Jews of Baghdad and what they went through. So I'm grateful to you and your scholarship and your journalism of bringing that to light. And again, I want to give not only Edwin a big thank you, but give Faye Lincoln just the world's biggest thank you for not only all she does, but especially for this week for bringing Edwin Black here. Thank you, Faye. You're a real gem for us, and this has been an absolute treat. And thank you all. Please join us tomorrow morning, 9:30, for our Day 2 service and our confirmation service in Yizkor. Appreciate you all. Shabbat Shalom. Hag Sameach.